But I want to say that I have a lot of respect for Clarence Page, and I really enjoy you on television, particularly when you go on Chris Matthews.
I hear a however coming.
Because Chris Matthews, I mean, part of the joy of watching this campaign was seeing Chris Matthews just stumble all over himself talking about race and gender. But there's a but right there. I mean, is this journalism we're talking about? I mean, should we aspire for something greater? I wrote down some things too. It's like this is the issues they covered. Is Obama black enough? He's too black. Will whites vote for a black candidate? Will Latinos vote for a black candidate? Do all black folk go to churches on Sunday that preach hate? You know, I mean, is this? Meanwhile, we have the financial crisis melting down right before us. No one's really covering that and getting a good handle on that when that's happening while we're all asleep at night. We have 2 wars. Shouldn't we aspire to something greater? That's the question. And this kind of got you journalism. It's not journalism. I'm sorry. It's entertainment. It's fun to watch. I'm guilty of that too. I like to watch Chris Matthews, and I enjoy too when you're on the show. But it's not journalism. And the fact is that newspapers dying. They're going through tough times. But you know what? They actually put themselves in that hole as well. Tribune is a great example. Continue to consolidation. Continue to buy more media properties. And meanwhile, you owe so much money back to the banks. You got to start cutting journalist jobs in order to remain profitable. So there is what's going on. This got you journalism to me is a symptom of a much larger problem that we have to address. And as people of color, again, I'll get back to my theme, like a broken record. We do not control the mass dissemination of our own image. And only 3% of all television stations in this country are owned by people of color. Only 3. African Americans only own 8 television stations out of 1,300 full power stations in this country. There's something wrong with that.
I actually agree with everything you just said.
Leslie, you wanted to say? Let me let Leslie jump in here real quick, Clarence, and then we'll follow up.
Just one point though. One reason why there are so few African Americans owning licenses is because once they own it and can make a big profit, they sell it. That happened to BET. It's happened to other places.
You do sell it because if you own one radio station and Clear Channel owns 8, they can push you out the market, leverage the advertising. So consolidate.
Crying all over the bank is what I'm saying. There are economic incentives for minorities to sell the licenses back.
Too, and that example, and how there was no, not anymore. But that's kind of another story. I was going to say, with respect to a couple of different things, one thing that I observed in the newsroom. This was my first presidential election with CNN, but I will tell you, having been at different places, there was a significant effort to overreach. Because Barack Obama was African American, and you had all these different conversations. So we were doing a series of Black and American, all these different areas to have a conversation to some extent about race. But in that conversation, there was a lot of talk. Just I would say in other communities of color, saying, well, where's Latino? Where's Native American? How's that conversation? And when we did talk about Latino in radio or other areas, it was always immigration. It was always the immigration rate. It was always so I'm up there talking about immigration. I said, there's a large evangelical Hispanic community. If you want to talk about Hispanic vote, there's the African American and his Latino evangelical community, which is interesting because they're aligning, blah, blah, blah. And it was just like crickets. People were like, and the anchors invariably would stand there and go, well, okay, but what about immigration? Isn't that going to be the key issue? And I'm like, wow, do we need to be in the other seat? Because the conversation was never directed to the full extent and the richness of our community. And even I would say, as being the conservative on there, they said, oh, well, you're just going to, sometimes they would think, oh, you're going to espouse things like Rush Limbaugh or this and that. And I said, no, I'm a woman, and I'm an independent, and I'm a Latina. And then I'm a Republican, because your perspective was so uniquely different. You could sit 2 people. We may get to the same point in terms of our value and our belief, but how we got there was so fundamentally different. And I think until we saw and heard more voices, even in a vast array of positions, you were never going to get the full context of the story.
But it does speak to, and Angie, pick up on this, and anyone else who wants to follow, it does speak to, again, those who make the decisions. If you look at the diversity that CNN has found, if you still look at the mainstream host in prime time on the weekday, they are all white. If you look at the first line of what I call defense for CNN, their quote-unquote major analysts, they're all white. Even with the popularity that Roland has found, he is still that, quote, second tier of analysts that they go through. The same thing is true at MSNBC. often the complaint for many of us is they'll call us if there is a, quote, black issue. But if there's just a regular issue out there, then, we'll go to the next guy. And it's usually a white male. So with the mindset and the inability for those who make the decisions, as Amy suggested, to change that mindset, do you have to wait, I hate to say it this way, but for that generation, quite frankly, to die off before you see real change?